Welcome to A Growing Concern. It seems like in the last couple of years, something having to do with energy is always in the news, whether it's the conference in Copenhagen or the various talking about climate change and global warming and all that. And now we've got this situation in the Gulf, a horrible situation in the Gulf, where British Petroleum's drilling rigs have leaked millions of gallons into the estuaries and Gulf of Mexico. Threatening the way of life of a lot of people, just like the Exxon Valdez 20 years ago, maybe 21, did for the folks in Alaska. And locally we also have a situation with energy where we have the attempt to bring liquefied natural gas, which is going to be brought in from other parts of the world and regasified here and shipped through this area to California. And there's been a strong opposition, and it's been growing ever since it began. People first started finding out about this liquefied natural gas. And I have a couple guests with me tonight. They're going to talk about different aspects about that, because there was a big rally and protest yesterday at the Northwest Natural Gas annual shareholders meeting at Northwest Natural Gas, because they are the ones that are involved with the Palomar pipeline, which is part of this whole debacle, I would call it anyway. But anyway, on my far right, we have Martin Evans, who's with volunteer with BARC. We work together occasionally. Mark's up on the BARC hikes. He led the last BARC hike, which we'll be showing at the Mount Hood College, Mount Hood. I guess they've changed the name to Metro East now through the next month or so. And then we also have Olivia Schmidt, who's working with who's a coordinator with a group of 2 or 3 different groups that are working with an anti-LNG coalition. So welcome to the program.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jim.
All right, so you might want to just fill in some of the gaps on what this is all about there.
Sure.
Liquefied natural gas, it's an issue that's been out there, and I don't know how well the corporate media have covered it, so people out there may not really know a lot about it.
Sure, yeah. Liquefied natural gas is a foreign fossil fuel. It starts out as natural gas in places that have enough of it to export as LNG. So it starts off as a natural gas. They extract it from the ground, liquefy it by freezing it down to negative 260 degrees, and that way they can put a whole lot more of it in a small space. They put it onto these tankers that transport it across the ocean, and it comes into import terminals, which is what's proposed for Oregon. Comes into import terminals where it's regasified and put into pipelines. In Oregon right now there are proposals for 2 LNG import terminals on the table and 3 pipelines that would deliver that natural gas, that LNG sourced gas, to a pipeline that takes it down to California. Up until recently there were 3 proposals to build LNG import terminals and 4 pipelines, but earlier this month Northern Star Natural Gas went bankrupt, and processing of permits for the Bradwood Landing LNG terminal were suspended. So we've had a really great victory this month. We've been able to defeat one of these massive LNG import terminals and one of the small pipelines associated. But what's left on the table is Oregon LNG, proposed for Warrenton on the Skipanon Peninsula with a 117-mile pipeline, the Oregon LNG pipeline. Then there's down in southern Oregon in Coos Bay, they're proposing the Jordan Cove Energy Project, which would be another LNG import terminal, and a 247-mile pipeline that would deliver that gas straight to the California border. And then up here we still have the Palomar pipeline on the table, which is basically the linchpin to LNG development on the Columbia River. That's a pipeline that currently is proposed to run from the Columbia River through the Willamette Valley over Mount Hood to connect with the Trans-Canada pipeline that would take the gas down to California.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the many websites that has to do with the resistance to this issue is heynorthwestnatural.org, and we'll get that up various times. And I know that there's a little video of you and your wife on that. Well, what's that all about?
Well, our video is about all of the things that we've done around our home to conserve gas, because that's obviously another part of this movement, is if we're going to have credibility and say, don't import this gas, we don't need gas, we're going to have to, step up in our own personal lifestyles and diminish and reduce the amount of fossil fuels that we use and become independent from them in various ways.
Mm-hmm. And what are some of the ways you were able to do that?
Well, it's simple things. And we insulated our home. We replaced the original 100-year-old windows with some, high-tech windows. We bought a furnace that operates at a much higher efficiency than before. We put solar panels on our roof that create about 2/3 of our electricity, so that there's not more gas-fired power plants out there creating electricity for us. And it's all simple things. A lot of them are cheap and cost-effective. A lot of them you can do yourself, and a lot of them create jobs for tradesmen, tradeswomen in the local economy too.
Which is a good point, because that's how they sell these liquefied natural gas facilities, is jobs to the economy.
Right, but conservation actually creates more jobs than any form of large-scale energy infrastructure development.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Martin's just right on. That's exactly what we've been saying all along. Why try to create jobs in an industry that's on its way out? Why continue investing in fossil fuel development when what we need to do is job creation for conservation, efficiency, and renewable energy? And then the other issue about jobs with LNG proposals is that they talk a lot about the jobs that would be created by the pipeline, but what they don't talk about is the jobs that would be lost in the agricultural industry in Oregon. The hundreds of miles of pipeline that are proposed, the Palomar pipeline, the Oregon LNG pipeline, and the Pacific Connector pipeline in Southern Oregon, would have a devastating impact on the winemaking industry, the private forest industry, and the farming industry in Oregon. And the way that happens is during construction, there's a 120-foot minimum construction easement. Everything in that 120 feet, everywhere the pipeline goes, has to be cleared and is used for digging the trench for the pipeline, laying the pipe, storing vehicles. After the construction of that pipeline, that easement, that right-of-way, shrinks down to a permanent 50 feet, which has to remain clear. No deep-rooted crops, no trees, no grapevines, no berries. That is really heavy for the agricultural industry to look at a 1 to 2 year period during construction where they have no access to that strip of land, and then restrictions afterward. And on Mount Hood, it means something even more devastating. That minimum 120-foot construction corridor is extended on Mount Hood up to 300 feet because in areas like Fish Creek, where you have really steep inclines, you need more space for construction to kind of backtrack to get up to those higher locations and have more equipment. Mm-hmm. And then having a permanent cleared 50-foot right-of-way through Mount Hood is just a permanent scar. And Martin and his family have been up to Mount Hood. They've hiked with Bark and seen those places, and I've heard Martin talk about how beautiful those places are. So.
I was going to move to that. I mean, Amy from Bark she didn't hike all 47 miles of it, but she hiked quite a bit of it. And you were along then, so you saw some of the country.
Amy hiked almost the entire way, and various groups of colleagues joined her at various points. And I joined her for a portion near Timothy Lake, and we actually crossed the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail, where the pipeline easement intersects with it. And my wife was with us. She was pregnant at the time, so my daughter was with us. Mm-hmm. And what we saw was just like some of the most pristine lands that are left in Oregon, which means some of the most pristine lands that are left in the world, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems to me that they've been clear cutting for quite some time, and there's reasons why they don't clear cut much anymore. And because of the effects that it has. And what effects could a pipeline that's anywhere from 120 to 300 feet, what effects can that have on some of these lands? Because I know you're crossing a couple scenic rivers.
So we don't know exactly how wide it's going to be. It's going to be at least 150 feet, which would make it a 700-acre clear cut, which is a huge clear cut. But
it's continuous clear cut.
Exactly. But even if you were going to clear cut 700 acres, a big straight line would be the worst ecological disaster way to do it, because it opens up a corridor for vandalism, for off-road vehicle use, for invasive species. It severs migration paths for animals, and it generally fractures the ecosystem into smaller and smaller pieces. And we know that a lot of endangered species, like the northern spotted owl, for example, they depend on large tracts of continuous healthy land that's not been clear cut. They can't handle like sort of a patchwork or a chessboard of healthy land. They need a territory that's continuous.
Yeah, and in terms of the restrictions, we have really strong, great environmental protections on Mount Hood that people, innumerable people have worked so hard to get. And what we've seen with the Palomar pipeline is that those restrictions are being slackened. There are more than a dozen amendments being made to the Northwest Forest Management Plan to accommodate the Palomar pipeline, because if it was a timber sale, it would be illegal. But because it's energy development, it gets this sort of giveaway hand up by the federal government that's supposed to be monitoring or protecting, managing these lands. And what we're seeing is those protections are being walked over and weakened because of, kind of bending over backward for this, unnecessary foreign fossil fuel development.
Well, and I want to remind the viewers that the reason why British Petroleum were able to sink that thing a mile deep was because they were given a category exclusion, which means that they didn't have to go by rules that were typically in enforcement. And think about the deregulation that we've experienced with the doing away with the Glass-Steagall Act that allowed banks to and the financial institutions to do what they did. There's reasons why these rules are there, and category exclusions, which is what the Bush administration also used. Didn't Bush administration use that in the forests as well?
Those are all Forest Service rules, which are ultimately executive actions in the answer to the president. But this pipeline, it would also violate a lot of acts of Congress and legislative rules, which are like the Endangered Species Act, obviously, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act, the Clean Water Act, and those are supposedly, stronger, pieces of regulation and law than mere sort of decisions by the Forest Service.
So what we're up against is we have the Clean Air Act and all these different acts, and so the Forest Service can just waive them, or do they have to petition Congress to do that, or how does that work? I'm just really curious. I mean, you're told as you're growing up that the rules are rules, but then you get into politics. That's not the case.
I think Northwest Natural is opening themselves up to years of lawsuits if they try to even get this thing permitted, because they're going to be burning through their investors' money for years in court, and best case scenario for them, there's not going to be a pipeline for years. We've already delayed them. Their original schedule said the pipeline would be done by now, and they haven't even dug a shovel full of dirt because we've delayed them.
And they don't even have a single permit they need to build it. And this is what we saw with Bradwood. Bradwood was supposed to be built in 2007. They went bankrupt in 2010, and that's because the public is paying attention. We're demanding that the processes function the way that they're supposed to. We're demanding for strong authority be used by the agencies with permitting power, and as a result, they're not just skating through, because like the Bradwood Landing Terminal was not an appropriate facility for where it was proposed, and that's the same thing with Palomar. One of the concerns that I have now is, knowing that we are going to defeat this pipeline, because we've done it with Bradwood. We have a strong base of people working on this. It's, as you said, the movement is growing. Bradwood Landing left this year owing $129 million to state agencies, county governments, lobbyists, Oregon businesses, the Rotary Club. They owe $129 million. And they don't even have $1 million in assets to liquidate to cover those fees. They owe $17 million to Northwest Natural for their agreement to pay for permitting costs on the Palomar pipeline. So, a question I have is, what happens when these other proposals finally realize that Oregon is not the place for LNG and we will not stand for these pipelines? Are they also going to walk away owing, hundreds of millions of dollars to what ends up being, the taxpayers and the working people of Oregon?
Mm-hmm. Now, we keep saying they, Martin. I'm wondering who are some of these they? You think, they must be people that have the boats and have the gas over in the other countries. But I've been told that they're not really people that are involved in so much into the energy market as just people speculating. Is there a distinction there between that?
You mean the people that are planning the projects?
Right.
Well, yeah, they're financial investors. That they want to buy a commodity. They have no expertise in petroleum or fossil fuels necessarily. They want to buy a commodity where it's the cheapest and sell it to a market where they can get a profit. And when you liquefy natural gas, it takes 25 or 30% of it is wasted in the process. So you might ask, how can you extract natural gas, waste 30% of it, and then still sell it at a competitive price with domestic natural gas? Well, obviously the extraction phase has to be really, really cheap in order to turn a profit on that process. And where it's really cheap is where there's no labor laws, where there's no environmental laws, places like Russia, Indonesia, the Philippines. And so there's this whole other side of a human rights crisis in the countries of origin for this gas.
There's also the carbon footprint because they have to ship it over here. So is it really, you know, a lot of it was touted in the beginning, although I don't hear them talking about that much anymore, that it was so much cleaner than coal. And if you've got a carbon footprint of getting it out of the ground, you know, gasifying it or you know, freezing it up, bringing it over here, all that's going to take more carbon.
In terms of greenhouse gas emissions specifically, it's approximately equivalent to coal. Much, much worse.
Is that the clean coal?
Much worse than domestic natural
no,
gas.
it's conventional coal.
Conventional coal.
Yeah.
I see that there's a lot of reasons why, and we've only just gone into a few of the reasons why it's a bad idea. And so far, the only good idea is that it's going to get some natural gas to folks in California who probably might need it a lot more than we need it here.
Well, they need it to pump water over some mountain ranges to fill their swimming pools. But, you know, I think if they don't get it, they're going to survive.
They'll just have to tighten their belt like you have.
That's right.
And what we've seen before is that California pushed these proposals out. Before these were planned in Oregon, there were 5 LNG proposals in California, and the government regulators there said, no, this is not a safe infrastructure to have in our bays or on our rivers, and the public said, no, we don't want this built in our state. And so the developers, you know, they moved north to Oregon and south to Mexico to try to use these areas as backdoors to California. California doesn't want it either. It's as you said, you know, it's an energy speculation scheme, and as long as there's there's somebody out there with an idea that they can sell, they're going to try to push this thing through.
You mentioned Baja. They did get one into Baja.
They did,
It
yeah.
was a receiving.
Yes, they did. One of the same companies that proposed a terminal in California moved down, Sempra, moved down to Baja, California, Mexico, where they built a terminal that sat empty for the first 6 months, finally received a shipment, the shipment sat in the tanks for another 8 months, and then was reshipped back out to a European country. So, you know, the question of need, there is no need for this. The Oregon Department of Energy and the Citizens Utility Board have both come out and said LNG is an expensive fuel that will raise gas prices in Oregon. The same thing is true in California, and because they aren't able to get those LNG shipments for a competitive price, they come in irregularly, they sit there for a long time, and they go back out, and they never even serve the region that they've come into, where these, you know, incredible environmental catastrophes have to take place to make it happen.
You know, part of this issue, just before, we got a little video to play, and I guess we should probably move into that because we're moving through the program pretty fast. There was a rally yesterday, and this would have been organized for quite some time. Both of you folks were there. There was about 200 to 300 people at Northwest Natural. Martin, what were they doing at Northwest Natural?
Well, it was the shareholders meeting of Northwest Natural, and you know, SEC law says, you know, the shareholders own this company. You have to meet with them once a year to tell them what's going on with the company. So we took advantage of that opportunity to educate the shareholders as they were going into the meeting about what the company is actually up to with their investment.
Did was anybody talk to any of the shareholders, or it was just being there?
Well, their rules say each shareholder gets to bring in a guest. So we had one shareholder that brought Olivia inside as their guest, and she talked to him.
Yeah. Yeah, Northwest Natural, since we started getting involved, paying attention to this issue, we've had a presence for the last 3 years at the Northwest Natural shareholders meeting outside, you know, rallying. And the first year that we were there, you know, there were people inside who asked questions, and Northwest Natural realized quickly that they needed to control the conversation about LNG and the Palomar pipeline. So they changed the format of their meeting, and what they do now is they require people to submit their questions in writing. And what the result of that is that the executive who's running the meeting censors questions that are asked. So at the meeting yesterday, when Greg Cantor, the CEO of Northwest Natural Gas, was answering questions about the Palomar pipeline and the debt owed to Northwest Natural and Palomar by Bradwood Landing, this $17 million that they're left in debt, the executive was saying, you know, we have a lien on that company's assets. We're the only secured debtor, and we are sure that we'll get that money back. But I've looked at the bankruptcy filings, and I know that Broadwood Landing has less than $1 million in assets to liquidate in order to close that gap. So as I heard the executive sort of making this misstatement, I stood and said, how can you say that they're going to close this gap when there's less than $1 million in assets to liquidate? So that got the attention of the shareholders in the meeting. I went on to explain that this was an unethical pipeline that was damaging the livelihoods of agriculturalists in the Willamette Valley, that there were 250 protesters outside demanding the cancellation of the project, and as I was being escorted out of the room, I just...
Funny thing about that.
I said, you are the shareholders, and it's your responsibility to hold this company accountable. So, the difficulty is, how do you educate the shareholders? And that is one way of doing that, is, putting yourself in a position where they are there and they are listening, and you have an opportunity to, exercise your freedom of speech to combat the falsities that are being propagated by the company.
Mm-hmm. And it isn't up to us so much to do it as it is to the media. But is the media doing it at all? Either one of you have been watching what the media is, how the media's been covering this? I don't mean just the shareholders rally. I mean just this issue that's been going on for what, 5 years now?
Yeah, 5 years.
Just wondering if either of you must have been kind of seeing how the media is covering it.
Yeah, well, the natural gas lobby, the fossil fuel industry, or the fossil fuel empire, if you like, they have gobs of money, and they pour that into strategic places like the mainstream media. So a lot of people will be seeing advertisements on, mainstream media that natural gas is the bridge to renewable energy, or natural gas is the clean energy that's so much better than coal and oil. And, the message that isn't getting out is efficiency and conservation are what's really going to create jobs and reduce the cost of energy, and create an energy future for the people of this country and this state that is one that is healthy, that's self-controlled. We're the underlying issue here obviously is consumption. There's no way for us to supply the amount of energy that is needed as long as we aren't living sustainably. And like Martin with the example of retrofitting his home or getting those new windows and doing what he can and his family can to reduce their carbon footprint, so to speak. Everyone needs to be doing that, but who also needs to be doing that is industry. We need to make those choices personally, but we also need the major industry in this state to not be signing up for more natural gas, for more coal, and attacking the issue at its most profound source, which is consumption.
And as you say, the source for that pipeline is the shareholders of Northwest Natural.
Yeah, in terms of where the money's coming from, yeah. I mean, Northwest Natural is putting up, they said just on permitting costs for Palomar, they've already spent $33 million. So, I mean, that money has to come from somewhere. It's coming from the ratepayers, it's coming from the shareholders, and, as long as shareholders choose to remain ignorant about this issue and not understand the unlikelihood of this moving forward, and the sinking ship that they're on with LNG, they will continue to dump that money in there.
But shareholder power has shown itself historically before. I mean, shareholders selling their shares is part of what ended apartheid in South Africa, and a shareholder movement, when it gets going, has enormous power to impact the way that corporations operate.
I hadn't heard that before. That's an interesting point. Well, as you say, the shareholders needed to be influenced, and yesterday you folks and about 250 other showed up to try to influence them, and our director here, Frank Mahoney, and I both taped it, but he put together a little 13-minute piece that kind of shows what was going on there. I think it leans heavy on the speakers and what people were saying, but you'll probably see Martin and Olivia there in this, but then we'll come back and we'll see him again. But it was a very exciting rally, and I think that it will kind of broaden what we've been saying here. So we'll be back in about 13 minutes.
I just want to take a moment to express appreciation for all the people that are working so hard. on this campaign for the last 5 years. First, the residents of Clatsop and Columbia and Washington and Yamhill and Marion and Clackamas and Wasco County and Southwest Washington. It's your land. This is you are the front lines on this pipeline and these terminals, and you've been out here all the way, the whole time. Thank you. To all of the students and young people who have brought so much energy to this campaign, thank you. To all of the artists who have made our campaign so beautiful, and the musicians, thank you. To all the forest and river defenders who have gone out and actually looked at the land that's going to be impacted by this pipeline, thank you. And especially to all of, I want to make a special acknowledgement for all of the organizers that have brought us together today and put these events together and given this their time for 5 years, especially Monica and Olivia and Amy and Brett and Alex and Dan. Thank you.
How many people are here?
There's 230 of us here. And we're just going to increase our numbers every time until Northwest Natural cancels the Palomar pipeline and cancels every LNG project in Oregon and Washington. Now, I also want to acknowledge that our country is grieving today because 11 men went to work on an oil rig and they didn't come home. And an ecosystem might never be the same. And there are thousands of families in the Gulf who have lost their livelihood, who depended on that ecosystem for their livelihood. And all because a greedy and careless energy company couldn't be bothered to follow the law. They couldn't be bothered to place people before profits. Well, that's exactly what Northwest Natural wants to do with LNG and the Palomar pipeline. They want to ignore the law. They want to put profits before people. No! But there's a flaw in their business plan. They've made a miscalculation. They thought that Oregonians were just going to sit, and Washingtonians were just going to sit back and take it. But that's not how it works around here. This is our land. These are our forests. These are our rivers. These farms belong to us. And there's no room on them for any Palomar pipeline. And there's no room in Oregon or in Washington on the Columbia for any LNG. I'm about to pass the microphone here to some very smart people who are all going to tell you their own reasons for opposing LNG. And I know there's as many reasons to be against LNG as there are people here today. That's what makes this movement so beautiful. But the first person I want to introduce is my reason. And this is my daughter, Ursula. And she's been involved in this campaign fighting Palomar pipeline since she lived inside her mother's womb here. And we walked the section of the pipeline through Mount Hood National Forest just to see what would be lost. And Ursula was with us, and she was a trooper.
So was her mom.
And that's the same forest that my grandfather took me to when I was a baby. And my dream is to become a grandfather one day and to take my grandchildren to that same forest. And I just want to thank you all for helping me defend that forest and keep it, you know, that forest is very close to my heart. And I'm so glad it's lasted this long, and I want it to last forever. And so I'm going to introduce a couple more speakers. Let's see. This is Gail. Welcome, Gail. And Gail's a shareholder. She is also
Citizens for a Safe Community.
she's a shareholder of Northwest Natural. She's also a landowner nearby to the Bradwood Landing Terminal, which we succeeded in getting canceled. And thank you, Gail.
Thank you for that rousing introduction. I am Gail Kaiser, President of Landowners and Citizens for a Safe Community.
Speak up, speak up.
And even though we feel the success of the bankruptcy declared by Northern Star Natural Gas, we are still standing side by side with our fellow Oregonians.
Doesn't get much louder.
We're standing side by side with our fellow Oregonians to defeat the Palomar pipeline. I am a shareholder with Northwest Natural. I've made my views known to them on a face-to-face basis, and still they persist with this foolishness, claiming they need the redundancy of the Palomar pipeline. No! We have all the gas supply we need. In fact, we need to get off of gas. So I'm here to urge Northwest Natural to turn to renewables. Renounce the fossil fuels that we have been hooked on for so many years. We have to protect our planet, and the first step in that is getting off of fossil fuels.
Thank you, Gail. Where's Joshua?
Right over there. Joshua. That's you.
And our next guest speaker is Joshua. He's a resident of Astoria, and he's been organizing around Astoria and Warrenton and Clatsop County for the last several years. Thank you, Joshua.
Hello? Oh yeah. Hey everybody. I'm from Astoria. And I'm wearing a hat right now. I know not everyone can see it, but it's a Bradwood Landing hat. Oh, recently vanquished. Oh. On one side it says good for the Columbia. Is it good for the Columbia? No! On the other side it says good for the economy. Is it good for the economy? No! What else? That's all it says, but that's all it means. It's a pack of lies. It's all they brought to our community. We beat them, and now they owe us money. How does that work? Well, so the citizens of Clatsop County, they owe us. Pardon. I want to say two things. One to y'all, thanks for being here. People in the affected communities, we need your support. We're still fighting.
Listen to KMUN radio.
Listen to KMUN radio. I agree. That's great. And the second thing, this is to Northwest Natural. Not only is there no place in Oregon, Washington, the Pacific Northwest for these projects, it's a bad investment. Yes. We will take your money. They pumped $100 million into the facilities in Bradwood, and they didn't get it by us. Our communities are strong, so don't try it. We know you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Joshua. It's so inspiring to see people from the affected communities and people from Portland getting together and just working on this campaign together. And so the shareholders are going to go in now, and we want to give all the shareholders of Northwest Natural a very warm welcome. And our message to Northwest Natural today is this pipeline's not going to get built, so you have two options. You can cancel it now, or you can waste some more of your investors' money and then cancel it. And I want to thank all of the shareholders for going in and standing up to Northwest Natural. We're going to give them a very warm welcome. Thank you, you want to talk now, or they?
Yeah, I think it's going on. Yeah, we're ready. Are you ready? Yeah. Can I go out and say
This is Amy Harwood, an organizer for BARC. She's been working on this campaign for over 5 years, and she's got some words to say to you. She's a very inspiring person.
Hi everyone! Thank you so much for being here. This is really exciting for me. My name's Amy Harwood and I work with the group BARC, and I have the great honor of defending Mount Hood National Forest from these people. So, a couple months ago, my friend Roger P. came and told me he wanted to do a project together. He works with an amazing political poster collective called Just Seeds. Yeah. and they worked on a mural project showing the resistance in Indonesia to this type of destructive development, and then came back here and worked with a group of artists here to show the story of our resistance here. Wow. This is a global issue, people. This is not just Oregon. We're not alone fighting this. And Washington, thank you. And when Roger starts to unveil the Oregon side of this and the Washington side of this, you might start to see some of your friends in there. He and the other artists used some photographs that I provided to them and some of the stories, and he went with some other artists and met with some of the people along the Palomar pipeline and some of the affected people in Oregon and Washington and talked to them and heard their stories. And then we went up to Mount Hood and I showed him some of my favorite places up in Mount Hood that we're trying to defend. And I'm really proud of these guys. This is a beautiful gift that they've given to our movement. This is the best kind of documentation we can have.
LNG!
No LNG! We all agree! 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 No LNG!
We gotta move back.
We all agree!
Politician in the state of Oregon to come out against LNG. As the only candidate in the gubernatorial primary to take a strong stand for which we are eternally grateful. Yes, we are proud, we are pleased to share my Linville Bradbury.
It's a real honor and a real pleasure to be here with all of you. I really appreciate the strong position you're taking, trying to make it clear to people here in Oregon that LNG is not our future.
All right. All right. I want to thank Frank Mahoney for putting that together. It was a very dynamic rally, and that was just a very small part of it. You know, it takes a lot of editing time to put these together, and this just happened yesterday afternoon, so he did a bang-up job on the little bit of time that he had. But we were discussing this a little bit when we weren't watching the rally, and you were saying something about, what was it you were saying about exporting, was it?
Well, I think Olivia's made a really clear case for why these terminals cannot be profitable as import terminals. And I was just saying, I mean, if we understand that as these kind of just lay people, obviously, you know, professional investors understand that, so maybe they have...
There might be something else going on
something else in mind.
Yeah, this has been a concern on the table for some time. The initial concern came up when we realized that all of the LNG-related pipelines proposed are bidirectional pipelines. They're pipelines that the flow can be reversed, so they can come in from the LNG terminals, you know, in toward California, or they can go out toward the LNG terminals. We started to raise that concern a couple years ago, and then lo and behold, there were about 5 LNG terminals in other places that all of a sudden were asking for permits to be changed to export terminals. You know, instead of taking in foreign LNG, they would be exporting the LNG. They would be exporting domestic natural gas as LNG, and that happened in places like Canada, for example. And there was a proposal to re-export LNG from a terminal down in the Gulf Coast. You know, we realized, yeah, it's possible. These LNG import terminals can be changed to export terminals. Then we started hearing, you know, there's this new abundant natural gas in the U.S. Reserves in the U.S. Rockies, and there are pipelines being proposed to bring domestic natural gas from the U.S. Rockies into the same locations at the existing pipeline, where those pipelines coming in from the U.S. Rockies would connect directly to the LNG pipelines that could go bidirectionally back out to the LNG terminals. So we started asking, you know, maybe this is for export. That certainly would be profitable because LNG is trading at 3 and 4 times the amount we pay for natural gas here on the global market, because places like Japan that don't have any natural gas with domestically rely on foreign LNG to support their natural gas infrastructure. So that's a big concern we have. One interesting nuance of that came up recently is that eminent domain cannot be used for pipelines that would be exporting natural gas from the U.S.
And the eminent domain is how they're going to get that swath of the pipeline through the farmer's land.
Exactly. The pipeline companies and the LNG companies that have pipelines have the right to condemn private property for their own profit. So they wouldn't be able to do that if they were proposing an export facility. So some people have been, you know, we were just kind of scratching our heads about it and wondering.
And without eminent domain, it would be basically impossible to build any pipeline anywhere.
Absolutely. Because no one's going to get, I mean.
Because one property owner could block the entire project.
Exactly.
Right. Good point.
And as a result of having eminent domain, these companies have the ability to sort of, they have landowners in a stronghold where, you know, to negotiate with a company that has the right to take your land at whatever cost they want, it's not really an equal voice at the negotiation table.
Well, I think it was in April, Martin, you led a bark hike up there to the Clackamas River, which is a wild and scenic river where they intend to cross that river. And there was a lot of issues that you covered, but I think that both you and Dan Sears were addressing the issue of how this affects. This stuff has to be liquefied in other parts of the world, and some of those parts of the world are Russia and the Middle East, and so there's dangers of us, you know, bridge fuel to the past rather than the future, because we bring ourselves right back to the dependence upon petroleum coming from parts of the world that don't like us.
Or that don't currently have a democratic administrations, at least.
Right. So what was that? I can't remember some of the things that you were talking about there, but I remember that both you and Dan Sears talked about it. What was some of the countries? Iran was one of them that has natural gas?
There's countries throughout the world that are, you know, South America, you know, has gas exporting countries. Bolivia is a big producer of gas. They export a lot of it to Brazil right now. Ecuador has gas. There's countries throughout the world that have large amounts of, you know, surplus gas that they could export into the world commodity markets. And the point of LNG is to have flexibility, so you can buy it wherever you want to buy it, wherever it's cheap, and sell it wherever you want to sell it. You can't do that with landlocked pipelines.
Yeah, and what Martin was saying before is that, you know, it's cheaper where the places where we're getting LNG from, it is made cheap because they don't have these environmental restrictions and the public safety protections, and you know, unlike, I mean, it's social injustice everywhere you look, you know, on this end, on the end, the exporting end, but as long as we externalize our resource our resource dependency, you know, we're going to not see those impacts. And the things we're not seeing are one of the top salmon runs in the world on Sakhalin Island, Russia, that was supporting subsistence fisher people, that has been completely obliterated by the development of LNG export terminals there. Or, you know, 24 is the official figure, and I'm sure it's much more, but 24 indigenous communities in South America have been displaced in the Amazon for exploration for gas to be produced into LNG. Indonesia, obviously, you can see in that beautiful piece of art, there's clearly death and devastation associated with that infrastructure there.
You know, and some places do have strong laws, but the price will be higher there. And as long as there's one place anywhere that doesn't have strong laws, that's where the gas will come from. It's the race to the bottom.
That's what was interesting to me about those two murals, that I knew that there was some sort of resistance in parts of the world, but I didn't realize that it was that well organized. So Indonesia is a place that has a lot of natural gas. I didn't know that, and there's a very strong resistance there.
Yeah, Indonesia is one of the top exporters of LNG, and then clearly there's resistance, but you know, it's at this point, it's the resistance of people who've had their rights trampled, who've been, you know, it's the resistance of people who are now dealing with the existence of an LNG export terminal on their land.
And the existence of accidents that take place during the drilling process. One of the reasons their resistance is strong is because there have been environmental disasters in Indonesia in the gas extraction process, not to mention the gasification and exporting process.
Absolutely, and we see that everywhere. Trinidad Tobago is one of the actually the top export LNG country that delivers to the U.S. And I just met a few months ago an attorney who has represented more than 30 families who've had to be relocated because their homes are too close to the LNG export terminal, which is, you know, they're flaring gas at that terminal. There's 24-hour lighted. It's, you know, light pollution, noise pollution, and those families are having high level of birth defects in their communities. So, you know, it's everywhere, and we don't want it to happen here.
But those same things are happening to families in the American Rockies too, in the gas extraction communities.
Exactly.
Domestically in the United States, they use fracking, which they try to break up the rock so that the gas pockets underneath the ground kind of cohere and they can get it all out. It makes the gas mix with the groundwater, and people end up drinking tap water that has gas bubbles in it. And
and it also gravely impacts their watersheds, you know, because they pump this chemically treated water deep into the ground, into the aquifers, you know, and those chemicals seep out into the groundwater. It's just, and so that, you know, damages fish habitat. We can't let it happen.
Well, you know, you start adding these things up. Mountaintop removal in the southeast of the United States, where they're taking the top off of mountains and dumping them in the valleys. What we just saw in the Gulf, you know, what you're talking about here is probably maybe not on the scale of the Gulf, but there's a lot of smaller scale things happening to people all over the world. You know, when are we going to learn to stop digging, so to speak? Because we've dug ourselves in a hole in our addiction to this fossil fuel. And not only the fact that it's going to run out, but the fact that what we're doing to the planet and to ourselves along the way. And this is not a bridge fuel to the future. It's a bridge fuel to the past.
Yeah, and I think it's great to, you know, make the connection with what's going on in the Gulf right now with the BP oil spill, because we've heard voices from those communities saying, you know, when they came in here, they promised that it would be safe. They promised this wouldn't happen. We allowed it because we needed the economic development. And, you know, those are the exact messages we're getting from the LNG companies. We have a great safety record. You know, there haven't been LNG accidents on the continental U.S. You know, this has we need to bring these jobs to your community. And what do you end up with? You end up with an LNG facility in the middle of populated Warrenton, Oregon, or right across from the municipal airport in Coos Bay, next to North Bend and Reedsport and Coos Bay, where if 10% of the cargo of one LNG tanker were to spill over water, the flammable gas cloud that would spread would be 3 miles in radius. We can no longer listen to the promises of energy speculators saying that their products are safe, that they're going to adhere to environmental, you know, protections, because we've seen that it doesn't happen, and we don't want to expose our communities to that.
And we've seen them have an accident, and then they say our technology is different now, it won't happen again, and then it happens again. I mean, that's what they said. That's what BP said. They said Exxon Valdez can't happen again. The technology is so different these days.
You know, I think the Raging Granny summed it up really good. We're sick of being lied to, you know. What were they talking? I think they might have been talking about the petroleum companies or the energy companies. You suck, you know, and we didn't get a chance to work that up. But they rewrite songs, and yeah, let's open up the phones. Good idea. We're down to about a little over 10 minutes. And if folks want to call in and make comments, you may think this is a good idea. I think the numbers that believe it's a good idea is dwindling all the time, thanks to folks that are out there trying to educate. And I'm glad we brought up what's happening in Russia. Now that was Sakhalin Island, Sakhalin.
Yeah, Sakhalin Island.
Sakhalin Island. I say that so folks can look that up. If you go to Sakhalin in Google, you can probably find out about it. I remember there was a fellow named Dmitry from Russia here a while back, and he talked a little bit about the damaging, and he had a PowerPoint presentation, and it was devastating to what happened. And the same thing would be happening here. We got a caller. First caller, you're on the air.
Yeah, thank you again for the show, Jim.
You bet.
Thanks for revisiting this topic, and I would like the guests' opinions on the upcoming governor race, and of the two that we are allowed to choose from. I'm not too pleased with Kit Sauber's past, and I have no idea what Dudley's future has. And if they have any insight into how those two candidates feel about LNG. and I'll take the answer up the air. Thank you very much.
All right.
Well, I can say for myself, I know how Bradbury feels about LNG, and that's why I supported him in the primary. Now I'm a little confused.
And actually, I work with nonprofit organizations that aren't, we're restricted from our ability to talk about candidacy races. So I'm not going to go into that too much, unfortunately. I'd love to, but I will say that, in order for LNG to be an important issue in the candidate races, then the public has to tell the candidates what they're concerned about. And so if you're concerned about LNG development in Oregon, contact all of your legislators and certainly candidates and let them know that it's an important issue for you.
And you can be absolutely certain that Northwest Natural is telling them how they feel about it.
Absolutely.
Because they hire professional lobbyists.
Yeah, they spend a lot of money at it. We have another caller. Next caller.
I'm Mike from Milwaukee.
Hello, Mike from Milwaukee. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm watching your show, and I'm very interested in it, but I'd like to know why you don't have a representative from LNG there to refute, if they can, what your guests are saying. I'm getting one side of the story, which disturbs me. Secondly, if, let's say, the LNG project went ahead, how many jobs are we talking about that are possible down there?
All right, a couple good points.
Well, I can answer the jobs question. The numbers that I have are for the Broadwood Landing proposal, which recently went bankrupt, but their permanent job creation was going to be 36 permanent jobs at their LNG terminal. Their numbers that they provide publicly vary depending on who they're speaking with, but if you look at their SEC filings, you see that the number is 36. When you look at the pipeline construction, it's more than 200 jobs, I believe. I'm not going to give a solid number, but it's a few hundred jobs.
Temporary or permanent?
Temporary. And when you look at the distinction, they have to provide all this information through the SEC and through their permit filings. And so when you look at the breakdown of jobs, you find that more than 60% of those jobs would be coming from out of the state. So in terms of local production for jobs, the numbers really pale in comparison to how many jobs would be lost in the fishing industry because of restrictions in the Bay and Columbia River, jobs lost on farms who have crop rotation taken out of rotation for 2 years, job loss.
Private timberlands.
Exactly. Private timberlands, winemaking industry. It's really, it doesn't pencil out in terms of the job creation that's provided.
And as far as the first question you asked, I doubt we could probably get anybody to come on to talk about that. But I must confess that I did not try. It actually didn't even enter my mind. I feel that the resistance, they have a lot of good points to make, and I think that I wanted to provide that platform to bring folks on to talk about this. But I'll take that to heart, and I'll see if I can find somebody. I don't really believe that Northwest Natural or any of the folks that are on that side would want to come on and talk about this. But I would love to do that.
And if they do want to talk about it, they have the right to have their own show here at Portland Community Media, don't they?
They do. They have a right to do that. I'm kind of surprised they haven't yet. And
certainly, if you turn to the mainstream media, they're getting 100% of that time, and there's no room for our voice there. So I think the balance is there isn't a balance, and it's not in our favor.
I didn't say that, but that's basically part of the reason why when I usually bring on resistance communities rather than the communities of the corporate communities, because they have all their money. You mentioned the lobbyists. They get their money out there, and since the corporate media is a corporate media, corporate before media, it's slanted in that direction. It seems like to me. I think we can have another phone call, but we'll get the next caller up. Oh, you're still on. Okay, I didn't realize the signal that I was given. Was there anything further?
Oh, yeah, there is, actually. I won't take much time.
All right.
The lady there in the middle, the lady said, she made some statements that I find hard to believe. She said that the 30 families there have a higher incidence of birth defects.
Yes.
I mean, when you throw stuff, I'm not saying that's not true, but you throw stuff out there without any kind of backup, without any kind of source, and being that you're on the show, people take that to be a truthful statement.
I can suggest where you can go to get that information.
Okay, 1 second. Please.
Okay.
Okay, the gentleman next to you said that because of eminent domain, the LNG companies can offer these people anything they want for the property. So are you saying that they could offer the people $5 for their houses and they would have to take it?
Okay, well, thank you for the comments. We'll open up the phones, but take the answers off the air, please.
If you want to get information about some of the impacts that are happening in global communities from LNG, I recommend the website lngpollutes.org. That's lngpollutes.org. The information I provided about Trinidad came from the mouth of a resident who lives in that area who was here attending the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference earlier this year. I took that firsthand account as truth, and according to the research that I've done, it's very clear that in areas of heavy resource extraction, including LNG and major industrial development, you have higher occurrences of, lower or higher death rates at births, and the specific example that was given to me was about a higher rate of birth defects in that community.
So that was LNG Pollutes?
lngpollutes.org.
And they'll also have other links, so he can follow up on that as well. And he addressed a question to what
I think he was talking to you.
Oh, me? What was the question?
Well, I think it was about eminent domain, and maybe that may have actually been a comment that I made, which is...
Yeah, because I didn't make any specific...
Yeah, the running figures that we see are people get about 25% of what their land is worth. The compensation for landowners...
You mean of their assessed fair market value?
Exactly, of the assessed fair market value, exactly. The way that the eminent domain works is the company only pays for the permanent right-of-way. They don't pay anything on the 120 feet that they use for a year or 2 years for construction. They only pay on the 50-foot right-of-way. On that, they pay a portion of the fair market value, which in my opinion, I don't know how you can assess a fair market value for property when it has no opportunity for bidding and there's no, the landowner doesn't get to weigh offers from different people coming to buy. And the issue with it being eminent domain is that if a landowner comes to that negotiating table and says, no, I'm not going to accept a few $1,000s for a 50-mile strip through the 6 miles of land that I own in Yamhill County, like many of these old-time farmers do that are affected by these pipelines, they can't come to the table and say, I demand this price, because if they don't go low enough, the company can take them to eminent domain court, do the proceeding, and the judge will settle what that amount that's paid to them is. So it's not a fair negotiating practice.
I appreciate the caller bringing those points up, forcing us to dot our I's and cross our T's, because we make statements, and it's because the guests make statements because this is what their experience is, and we're not, we don't have footnotes at the end of the show in order to let everybody know where we get this information. But if that's what the live call-in portion of this is for. If you're interested in some of these statements that are made, you want to research it, there's the opportunity to do it.
And if I can I'd like to qualify that.
We got about a minute left.
Which
Go
is
ahead.
just to say that I work with Oregon Citizens Against the Pipelines, which is a grassroots community group made up of landowners impacted by these pipelines. So my experience knowing the attitude of landowners impacted is from working with those communities for 3 years and personally having personal relationships and experiences with the landowners that are facing this problem.
All right. Well, we're down a little over 30 seconds here. Sometimes they take us out early, so if we just disappear, that's it till next week. And appreciate you folks coming on. Martin Evans with Bark.
It's been a privilege to be here, Jim.
All right, and Olivia.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Well, I want to thank the folks for tuning in. I also want to thank the calls. We always appreciate comments. We always appreciate the questions, and keeps us on our toes. And so we'll be back next week. We're bringing a woman named Nancy Price on. She's with the Alliance for Democracy National. There's a water conference going on next week. So see you next week.